Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to another episode from the Chaos series. That's right, like I said, we are going back and forth between mainline series and the Chaos series. Today we're moving on with our Cults, Demons, and Warbands series from Nurgle to Tzeentch. So, let us get right into it. Tzeentch's Warbands, Cults, and Demons. Tzeentch has a very interesting connection with his forces in real space. Now, most of the gods, or at least the perspective of most of the gods, is that their servants in real space are genuine servants. The worth of belief and the worth of value translates directly into their success. Not so with Tzeentch. Tzeentch's goals are unfathomable and quite literally labyrinthine in their both complexity and their innumerable self-contradictions. As a result of this, while Tzeentch does have many followers in real space, many of them are not so outwardly aware or outwardly in non-denial that their god does not care much about them, or at least maybe not about them personally. The people in charge may have Tzeentch's favor, and we might be able to get a crumb of that through them, but us ourselves, the tiny little chess piece that we are, there's a much higher chance that we simply are a pawn in this game, as opposed to some of the other Chaos Gods who might use us for an actual purpose. There are reasons why you would still join even with that, but it is true that amongst all of the gods, Tzeentch tends to care, quote-unquote, the least for his followers. Tzeentch's worship in general and his demands are quite various, and honestly they are so eclectic that it would be difficult to name them. The central tenets of Tzeentchian theology, or Tzeentchian worship really, are based on the concepts of change, the concepts of duplicity, and the concept of planning or plotting. Now, intrigue and really just intelligently psychopathic behavior are really Tzeentch's bread and butter. It may seem like an absolute bunch of schizo nonsense in the moment, but once you get revealed to the greater plan, it becomes a lot more obvious what's actually going on. And then you usually die. That tends to be how it occurs. You get a brief look at the weave, and then you are scattered to the four winds. Those who aren't usually end up quite rewarded for succeeding in their small part of the tapestry. So his demands are not just that you follow his central theology, change, worship of Tzeentch, progress, ambition, personal achievement, and psychic mastery, but also that you fulfill his minor engagements of fulfilling the role that you serve as a pawn in his great game, or his portion of the great game that he plays in real space. Why do we generalize Tzeentch for these video examples? Mostly because everything that I have said about Tzeentch up to this point pretty much still follows on. I have made Tzeentch videos, I've made videos on most of the legions that we'll be talking about, so if you want to go back and look at the Deamons, or look at Tzeentch's worship itself, or how his cults respond, that kind of stuff, go ahead and do that. We're just talking, like I have said, about how they work in real space and his servants. So, quick breakdown, Tzeentch's forces in real space, how are they broken down, and what's the comparison between Astartes, humans, and demons, number-wise. Now, Tzeentch has one of the most unique breakdowns as far as population. Tzeentch has many marines. He has his own legion, and then he has thrall bands, and he has the occasional independent sorcerer. So he has marines, yes. And some of them have capabilities that the other gods don't have. For example, his thrall bands don't necessarily have to be Tzeentchian marines. They can be marines of different types who are simply at his beck or call, or at the kind of mercy of another group that he is in control of. So, you know, whether they're being mind-controlled by a greater demon of Tzeentch, or whether they're having something else done to them that's forcing them to act in the way that he wants, these thrall bands can give him more variety than most other godly legions have access to. But he also has a large number of humans. This is mostly because the things that he preach preaches, much like Nurgle, really do appeal to mankind. Not only the concept of personal ambition, which of course is prevalent if not universal in all men, but also the concept of progress and, arguably a warped sense of like personal passion. Now, I'm not going to say that Tzeentch is a god of hope, because, of course, I think, hope and such are things that the two of them share, Nurgle and Tzeentch as partners. Tzeentch's hope is vain hope, whereas Nurgle's hope is that you give up hope. So, they kind of share hope in a very distorted way, but in either way, all of those apply to humans, and they very much draw large followings, though I will say amongst Tzeentch's cults, you will find very few brave, bold, courageous, or self-sacrificing individuals. You will find far more deluded, depraved, and arguably self-saving individuals. So it's a very different tenor and caliber of cultist that Tzeentch tends to attract, and that can be both a positive and a negative, as we will talk about in this video. And finally, for demons. Now, I argue that Tzeentch's demons are some of the easiest to actually summon into real space, mostly because he has a lot of little ones, and lots of ones that are not very smart, so it's not too hard to get them there. Utilizing them when they're in real space, however, is a lot harder, for reasons that we'll go into when we get to that section. So let's talk about his legions and warbands first, the Astartes, the Immortals, and this is honestly going to go rather quick, because he doesn't have a ton that have a bunch of variety to them. First off, you got the Thousand Sons. These are the sons of the Cyclops, the sons of Magnus, they're from the Heresy. Relationship-wise with Tzeentch, they are more the sons of Magnus than they are the scions of Tzeentch. Individual sorcerers are certainly more devoted to Tzeentch than they are to Magnus, but as a whole, the majority of the Legion would sooner serve the Crimson King than they would serve Tzeentch alone. Now, again, there are outliers, and we're going to talk about them when we come to independent sorcerers, but individuals like, arguably, Ahriman is more loyal to Magnus than he is to Tzeentch. At least when push comes to shove, I think he would probably rather serve Magnus. Arguably, some of the other truly embodied sorcerers within the Legion, those who have not become Rubricae, or rather those Marines who have not become Rubricae, there are no sorcerers who are Rubricae, obviously, but those folks likely would prefer to serve Magnus over Tzeentch, but as Magnus is tied to Tzeentch, they, as a Legion, are tied to him as well. Not that it's a hate relationship. I often get people saying that, well, if only Magnus wasn't tied to Tzeentch, the Thousand Sons would be, at a stretch, loyalist or more likely independent. And I don't really disagree with that. I think that there is enough ambition in the modern Thousand Sons that they would end up worshiping Tzeentch in some way, or at least contributing to him. So, arguable whether or not independence from Magnus would grant them independence from Tzeentch, or even Magnus's independence would grant them independence from Tzeentch. So up to you on how you view that. I certainly know that there's a lot of different opinions when it comes to how the Thousand Sons operate. The main thing I want you to take away from this is just that they are the sons of Magnus first, and then they are the followers of Tzeentch second, generally. Organization-wise, you have sorceress cohorts, and you have what I call a demi-legion, for a very specific reason, mostly because the rubrics can't really operate on their own as independently as, say, the Death Guard can. 10 Death Guard Marines are still Marines, but 10 random rubrics are not really Marines anymore. I mean, they are capable of fighting, but they are far more directionless when they don't have a sorcerer around. Now, of course, that's not to say that there wouldn't be sorcerers around, but I am saying that there's a limit to how far you can break down the Thousand Sons as an organization before you start seeing cracks in the actual, coordination of their units. So, on the large side, they definitely are a large warband or a demi-company style organization. When they deploy, they'll have a coven of head sorcerers, and then they will have their various, tens, if not hundreds of rubrics, and then occasionally thousands of rubrics. Along with mixes of various other Tzeentchian creatures, demons, very commonly used, and then also Zangors, which mostly kind of function like cultists for them. They do have cultists of their own as well, but their Zangors are arguably more effective than Tzeentchian cultists, again, for the same reason that Tzeentchian cultists are more focused on their ambition and their personal success, and arguably their own personal survival, more than they are the quote-unquote esoteric goals of the Thousand Sons. There are definitely exceptions to that, but I would argue that the literally demonic-infused Zangors are more loyal to Tzeentch than actual cultists of Tzeentch are. And they certainly are more loyal to Tzeentch. The humans would be more loyal likely to the Thousand Sons than the Zangors, probably. I think that's arguable again, but loyalty is a very fickle thing when we're talking about Tzeentch, of course. Their targets are basically what you would expect. There are the various sorceress targets, like personal advancement that a sorcerer may want. For example, Armin's quest for the Black Library, and the various other sorcerers who tend to just go to places of high demonic concentration or try and suss out and discover where they may find various relics or ritual items for them to take. So that's one side of things. The other side is, unlike Mortarion, who is very much like, yes, in league with Nurgle, or like Angron, who is more of a slave to Khorne, Magnus has his own goals, that while they are woven into the warp and weft of his master's plan, they are definitely Magnus's goals, and not just Tzeentch's goals. Which is an important thing when we're talking about, why is the Legion doing this? That doesn't sound like something Tzeentch would want, or that doesn't sound... It's Magnus. Magnus has some level of, I'm not going to say personal independence, but at the very least, he has some level of personal drive that helps him to make decisions absent his master's control. So I would say Magnus definitely directs the Legion in a way that is more personal than Tzeentch himself does. Then we get to the independent sorcerers. Examples are something like the Coven of Nine. These are Tzeentchian warbands who have two important things about them. There's a wide spread of these, but not a lot of detail on them, so it's very wide, not very deep. Worst kind of lore, by the way. Very wide, not very deep. So the example here is it is a force devoted to Tzeentch, led by a sorcerer, has to be led by a sorcerer to be an independent sorcerer warband, a independent force worshipping Tzeentch, led by a sorcerer, that does not have a problem working with undivided forces, or is completely divorced or unrelated to the Thousand Sons at all. So an example of an independent sorcerer warband might be a chapter librarian, like Azariah Kairos, goes rogue and takes his company or so and just starts worshipping Tzeentch. Full out. Just goes full ham on the Tzeentch worship. There's a sorcerer in charge. They are willing to work with Chaos Undivided, generally. And they are Tzeentch aligned. And they are unrelated to the Thousand Sons. The other option would be Thousand Sons sorcerers who defied the will of Magnus in his order to return and reform the Legion. There are probably not many of these, but considering how Tzeentch's worship actually works, it's more likely that sorcerers would take their rubrics and fuck off if they had a mind to go somewhere else. Obviously, if they were loyal to Magnus, they would not become an independent sorcerer warband. They would just join a company and be part of the Thousand Sons again. But there are examples where a truly embodied sorcerer might have heard Magnus's call to reform the Legion and pretty much said, no, like, no, Dad, I'm not doing that. I'm not going around with you and doing this whole heresy thing again. I've got my own thing going, so they'll outright resist the will of Magnus. Now, if these people get found out by the Thousand Sons, they'll probably get murdered, but as long as they stay far away from that area of space, they're perfectly fine. Another great example here is that, I have 6 sorcerers there, but just in general, these independent sorcerer warbands tend to filter the psychers upward, basically. So they will intentionally breed more psychically active individuals and attempt to implant them with gene seed. And then they will also have sorcerers, the more experienced ones, be the top of the totem pole. It won't be some brutal warlord. It won't even be some incredible schemer. The psychers will take prominence. Because they're, number one, consider themselves blessed by Tzeentch already, but number two, they are, in a vacuum, the most deadly marines in existence in a regular warband. I mean, there's not much you can do to overcome a Chaos Sorcerer in Terminator plate. And especially one who has access to a lot of rubric. Like, that is a hard sell to try and defeat them. And that's why oftentimes they'll form councils. You know, these are not even equal sharings of power, but they are certainly, hey, we're all working towards the same goal. Let's not be idiots and try and solve this intelligently before we go, backstabbing each other, obviously. They're aware of the tendency of chaos to stab each other in the back, so we try and avoid that. Again, usually they are large warband size, and they use a mix of cultists, demons, and marines. They kind of sub out the Zangors, which are common on Sortiarius for the Thousand Sons. They swap them out for demons, generally, and they use those in active combat. Finally, we have more of a classification than we have a type here. Thrall bands. Thrall bands are forces either reliant upon the Thousand Sons for their existence, or directly under the influence, or the thrall, of a greater demon, or the Legion as a whole, or Tzeentch himself. There have been occasions where Tzeentch's demons, especially his greater demons, will interfere with and corrupt a force, be it loyalist Astartes, be it Astartes or cultists of a completely different faith, or even his own warriors will corrupt them and will misdirect them for Tzeentch's own ends. Like, literally, the most important thing about the Thrall bands is that they can be non-Tzeentchian forces. These can be Imperial Guard regiments. These can be traitor regiments. They can be cults. They can be cult armies. They can be plague marines. They can be marines of Khorne. Any of these Thrall bands, the only requirement that you need to have in order to be a Thrall band is either you are reliant upon a Tzeentchian organization in order to survive, and you must follow their orders, basically, or whoever is the head of your organization is basically just being puppeted around in some way by a greater demon of Tzeentch. And thus, you really have no free will, you are just another pawn in the great game. So let's move on to the proper cults of Tzeentch. Most of them start through two angles. One is the political angle, and I do mean traditional political angle here. A Machiavellian type personality cult. You get a politician who's so good with words, has such a silver tongue, is such a natural pure breed liar, that he can come from absolutely nothing and still make it in society. And he drags up all these other people with him. People who have no reason to be in higher society, to be honest. They don't really come from the right pedigree. They might not have the right affectations or manners. But with that guy in charge, with the demagogue, with our Machiavelli in charge of the cult, it doesn't matter. They don't need to be. That guy is that guy. He's talented enough, he's skilled enough, he has enough money and knowledge that he's able to bring us all with him on his rush to the top, essentially. The next one is the duplicitous philanthropist. Basically, it is the ambitious will to expand. Usually, this literally means buying the neighborhood, like buying your way into power, developing enough criminal organizations and underground businesses that you become a millionaire overnight, and you only get more wealthy from there. 9/10 of being an imperial noble is money, and the other 10th is bloodline. Shag some random noble, get laid basically, and if you're rich enough, you will become a noble. Pretty much overnight. Now, people are going to call you scum, and they're going to have negative pejoratives for you essentially banging your way into the higher nobility, but yeah, it works. Like, it really does work. A Tzeentchian demagogue basically just has to pick up a significant other with a big enough title, And as long as they're rich, which, let's be honest, considering the amount of crime that they do, they will be rich, then you'll be accepted into higher society. From there, it's a hop, skip, and a jump until you're governor of the whole planet, and your cult is now the PDF. Like, it is remarkable how Tzeentch is one of the few cults that can really win via politics. It's like winning Catan via a very specific set of, political machinations or circumstances, like longest road wins you the game. Like, that's kind of the idea with Tzeentch. He's one of the few who can win in a bloodless revolution where the demagogue just gets elected or buys his way into the ruling family and then ends up in charge anyway. At that point, all you really gotta do is turn the colors and swap over a little bit of society, and your cult's on top. Everyone else doesn't really have a choice at that point. Now, being undetectable as a planetary governor who worships Tzeentch, that's a little bit more difficult, but it's not impossible. People have done it before, and Tzeentch is nothing if not sneaky. What are we looking for, then, in our acolytes and demagogues who are very sneaky? Feathers. Feathers a big one. It's kind of like a dead giveaway. If they're growing feathers in their hair, if they got little stubby feathers under their arms or on their back, any of that stuff's a dead giveaway. Fancy clothes is another one. You'll often see, I like to say that amongst all the cultists, Tzeentch likes to give the best drip. Because he really does. I mean, gold, blue, feathers, brass. He really is making massive use of quite expensive and posh clothing. And I say he like it's Tzeentch for a reason. These uniforms, like we talked about before with cults, the uniform uniformity, the ununiform uniformity, the idea that, well, we're all wearing different things, and yet we're all wearing the same thing. We're all representing the symbol. It's blue, it's gold, it's multicolor, and it's very much in line with the other cultists, even if it is more or less fancy. These fancy clothes, and arguably the refined manners, are not dead giveaways. There are plenty of imperial nobles who have fancy clothing and are very good at manners, but the other piece of it is the next part: false humility and composure. Now, if you're talking to someone and you're like, man, I'm saying lots of stuff, and he's just kind of taking it on the chin, he doesn't seem all that worried about his position or about the threats I'm making or the bribes he's been caught in doing, why does this person not seem worried like a normal politician would seem worried? It's because they're dirty. They're already planning your death, essentially, so they have no reason to be afraid of you. They know something that you don't know, and that's that they're not playing this political game by the rules. They've been cheating since day one, and you're trying to expose them in some sort of good faith maneuver. They're already plotting for you to be found dead in a dumpster the next day. So the false humility and composure, oh, I didn't realize, oh, I'm so sorry, well, let me just, and they never seem perturbed, they never seem upset, it's because they're not playing the game fairly. They never were, and they never intended to actually give you a chance to unseat them. The only reason that you're being allowed to levy accusations against them is just part of the plan to discredit anyone who would try and bring them down. You better count your days if you're trying to expose a Tzeentchian demagogue, because they are very good at making people disappear and making it look like it was your fault, basically. And then finally, for the love of God, check the eyes. For some reason, it's always the goddamn eyes with Tzeentch. Whether it's incorrect coloring, whether it's heterochromia, whether it's the eyes being fucking purple and blue and multicolored, if there's eyes somewhere else on their body, if they've grown a third eye, it's always the gosh darn eyes. Whenever you meet someone, it is polite in most societies to look them in the eye while they are talking and while you are talking. Do not let the Tzeentchian demagogue look away from you. Look into that motherfucker's eyes, because you need to figure out whether or not he's good or not. And the eyes are almost always a dead giveaway. Now again, this is not demonstrative. I'm kind of being funny here, but, just, it's common. Why is it always the eyes? I do not know. It's a thing with a lot of the Chaos Gods. They've all got weird eye stuff, except for Khorne, basically. Khorne is the only one who doesn't have weird eye stuff, except for the whole, your eyes are full of blood. So I guess they all have weird eye stuff to a degree, but Tzeentch is just particularly demonstrable. How do they seek to succeed? Well, again, two main ones. The cloak and dagger method is the most common. Again, that concept I talked about before with Tzeentch, which is like, I know where 90% of the planetary government lives. Me and my hyper-intelligent cronies could overthrow this government in a night. I give you the option of giving me power willingly, or I declare war on you, you're all going to be poisoned to death, and then I will wade to the throne through a very, very minuscule puddle of blood. The cloak and dagger saves Tzeentch a lot of time and a lot of effort. All of the preparation that Tzeentchian cults do are essentially like dominoes. By the time that you get to the 10th domino and you start to see the pattern, it's already too late to stop it. You're already chasing after all these plots and plans and threads, and the Tzeentchians have an infinite amount of time to go ahead and knock some more dominoes over that you weren't even keeping track of. So, the Cloak and Dagger is really designed for minimum bloodshed, maximum believability. You don't want to be questioned as a Tzeentchian cult, because you don't often have a huge military force behind you. You'll have something, but not enormous. And then the second one is the quote-unquote, well, now that that's over, I have a bridge to sell you method. And this is a replacement method. Instead of killing the people in charge and seizing control that way, in kind of a semi-bloodless coup, now you literally manufacture society in such a way that the society rises up and chooses to place you in charge. This is literally the best definition of like a manufactured crisis or a false flag attack. These are really common. There's a warp storm, or there's an assassination, or a natural disaster. Maybe you had something to do with it, maybe you didn't. Nobody knows, nobody can prove it, but the population is not happy with the government. You go out and advocate that you can fix things, and people believe you because you are a massive Tzeentchian cult and you represent a huge portion, million or so, of the population. And as a result, more and more people not only flock to the cause, but also keep calling for the people in charge to be removed. And once they are removed, or once they crack down and then you assist, with the propaganda efforts on their downfall, you go, well, now that that's over, I have a bridge to sell you. You know us, those guys who were helping you and the ones who helped out during the thing, we're actually really, really smart, and we've been studying planetary government for a while, and we have a ton of money. We'll literally pay everyone to fuck off and let us be in charge, and we will run it better than them, and arguably you will. Like, that's the funny thing. For the first couple of years before the Tzeentch cult is actually exposed, they're arguably more effective than the actual imperial government because they balk at no crime, and they balk at nothing, basically. There's nothing immoral or morally beneath them, essentially. They will always do exactly what is in their best interests. So they are essentially masters of realpolitik, which makes them very, very terrifying as a political opponent, because how the hell do you stop a group of people who have literally nothing to lose? If they die, who freaking cares? As long as they're successful, they're good. Like, you are screwed. They are set up for life, and you are not. So, the I have a bridge to sell you method, the replacement method, can also be very, very bloodless. Like, practically no violence actually has to take place for the replacement method to work. Now, these are the ones that they want to happen, the bloodless ones, or the very, very little blood ones, the Richelieu coup kind of thing, where you just shoot, like, the planetary governor and a couple of officials, and then some of their bodyguards, maybe a little bit of the PDF, but after that point, you shouldn't have to engage in too much combat. And then the replacement, in which you literally engage in no combat whatsoever, it's just pure politics, gets you in charge. So that's what they want. They can engage in classic combat as well. And the example of what they would have to do that is like 30,000 bolt-action rifle dudes, 5,000 acolytes with autoguns. That's your, like, main line. The other thing is you'll have a couple thousand, I have maybe one per every 10 or one per every 100, flamers and machine guns. Now, Tzeentch is very big on personal heavy anti-infantry weapons. Now, this is like flamers, fire weapons, Molotov cocktails, but also machine guns. Now, I don't really have an answer immediately as to why he doesn't favor anti-tank weapons, but my main justification is that he uses so many psychers that he will eventually be turning them into AT weapons. So, reasoning being, a cult would probably try and get their hands on as much saturation firepower as possible. One, because it helps them deal with people who might be in defensive positions and it helps them kind of rat them out. And then two, they don't need the anti-tank because they're using psychic powers, and also they don't want to get caught in that type of open field combat where they'd be fighting armor in the first place, and if they are, then it's time for the rogue psychers and the possessed to come out. So 10 rogue psychers is not unreasonable for a cult that's managed to succeed and make itself an army. Obviously you want to keep possessed around, so at least one. 30 spawn, roughly, that's just going to be accidents from making various groups of mutants or possessed, and then a psychic cohort or small demonic bodyguard for the demagogue. It's very important that generally Tzeentch cults will have, again, psychers bubbling to the top. Occasionally this is not the case, but that's kind of rare, because why would you become a Tzeentch demagogue and then turn down becoming a psycher? Not exactly sure why you would do that. Maybe for sanity reasons. I could understand it if you were already a little unhinged and you didn't want to give yourself that much personal power. I could understand. But the other thing is, oftentimes Tzeentch's leaders will make use of his demons. Mostly because, again, almost all of his demons have some of the most powerful anti-tank weapons available to them at all times, not to mention magic. So they'll keep demonic bodyguards, or they will keep psychers as bodyguards. So, what about cult armies of Nurgle? As you can see from the images, they are often very, very colorful. And I mean that quite literally. Cult armies of Tzeentch generally start a little bit more rarely from traitor regiments. This can happen. I want to emphasize that every god can get traitor regiments on their side. There are even examples of Tzeentchian traitor regiments. You have some examples from the Gaunt's Ghost series that are a little bit more tangential. They're more like traitor PDF, or even like just cults that happen to encourage or to include army elements. But you also have sections of traitor regiments that go offline because one specific person at the very top is a traitor and worships Tzeentch, or is possessed by a greater demon of Tzeentch. So rarely it's traitor regiments, but it does happen. I want to emphasize that it is possible. More commonly, however, you have the long planning period where you have either a cult succeeding and developing into an army, or you have the classic string pulling method. You're pulling apart at the fabric of society, you're putting people in the right places. As I like to say, you're putting all of the weight on your side of the seesaw before you start pushing each other around, and as a result, you're able to succeed and grab enough weapons and equipment to form an army without having a lot of bloodshed. Remember, if the PDF is not having to be completely 100% destroyed in order for you to succeed, then you're going to get about, several million firearms basically for free. And a lot of the times you'll also be getting the men to wield them in addition. In the bargain, you'll get the PDF on occasion. So, it's always a good idea for the army to be spawned out of this sort of long-term strategy method. What do you look like in the acolytes and demagogues? Really, I have to say, it's the most obvious of all of the demagogues. Literally nothing about them is normal, and again, a vast majority of them are psychers. So I've just given some examples over here. Tzeentch is a god of mutation and a god of constant change. Very colorful. All of the acolytes and demagogues will be colorful. They will be different. They will have very little about them that truly resembles a human. They may retain a humanoid shape in terms of arms and legs, but they may grow wings. They will certainly grow multiple sets of eyes. They may grow horns. They may grow feathers. Many of these things are far more pronounced mutation-wise than they are for other cult demagogues or even for other army demagogues. The blessings that you receive as this upper level of Tzeentch worshipper are quite literally life-changing, and it is a dramatic change from what we would see in a normal human cult. I mean, just look at the images on screen, and it's pretty obvious that this is nothing like any of the demagogues we've looked at so far. Combine that with the concept that Tzeentch is big on, like, flamboyant ways of dress and behavior, you know, as well as, like, schizophrenia and sheer madness, and you kind of get the picture that, oh, it's obvious if I were to line up a demagogue from each god, which one is the Tzeentch one, pretty much. You'll see a lot of blue and gold, basically, and the occasional purple. You know, do not mistake Tzeentch for Slaanesh. Very, very different. Generally, it'll be also obvious. Again, you'll see the wings. The wings will be the big determiner there. How do they seek to succeed? Well, shock and flare is really the biggest one. But the important thing is that it's not shock and flare in the traditional sense. We've talked about shock and flare before. The idea that a cult will try and throw everything into one Hail Mary attack. Tzeentch does this because his units are not really made to grind it out in the pocket. They're not going to have enough equipment, enough numbers, or enough firepower to really do that for a long period of time. But for a short period of time, they can dominate the battlefield with firepower advantage. And the other thing is, they combine gunpowder with warp magic. That is one of their largest advantages, is that they use psychers and trained warp magic and other sorcery as a tactical battlefield asset rather than a random stud or an occasional advantage. Most of the other Chaos factions use psychers as that kind of stud, as that focus point, as that sudden, like, surprise or change or dynamic change. Tzeentch uses it like it's a fucking heavy weapon. It is genuinely a direct combat psyker role that even the most uncontrolled of random Chaos psychers can technically succeed. If the psyker is part of a squad and he isn't able to control his powers, just throw him at the enemy, and there's a pretty good chance he will detonate himself like a 500-pound bomb. You know, he's dead, but at the same time, that was a 500-pound bomb that just went off. That's a lot of firepower in one human-sized package. And arguably, we'll have quite a few of those as we create more psychers and also have more psychers in general due to chaos corruption over time. You know, that's assuming we have time, which usually armies will. So, in a standard Hive cult army of about 1 million, you would have likely the following. 150,000 autogun cultists. Again, that's your mass, that's your chaff, that's your garbage who are going to be ground up and spit out by enemy armies. 2,000 light vehicles with LMGs, and 300 medium self-propelled guns. Again, these are going to be mostly improvised, but you can see again the heavy anti-infantry weapons and the shock firepower element of their vehicles. And about 10,000 acolytes with ensorcelled weapons. That rounds up our actual troops, but then we get to the real units. For the acolytes with ensorcelled weapons, you could be looking at any number of things from like assault troops who have specialized ammunition, or they're using warp flamers or anything of that nature. And then you have the menagerie. You know, somewhere between 5 and 20,000 mutants, spawn, possessed, and various other horrors. These are, again, like I've talked about with the Cult Armies video, shock troops, in the most classic sense. When your acolytes or your vehicles need a break, and they can't hold the line, or you need to pull back, throw in the massive unit of just Hail Mary crusher infantry that are completely without fear, that have no concept of self-preservation, and that are pure melee brutes in an army that relies pretty heavily on ranged firepower, and you could save yourself a lot of time and possibly even create an opening. And then finally, for the demagogue, you'll be looking at a robust psychic core. Other psychers who are able to control their powers and work along with him, or psychers who can protect him from other psychers, and then normal bodyguards in addition to that. Demons of Tzeentch. If you just give me 1 second. Now, classes, we've got the small. You will note I am including the versions from Warhammer Fantasy here. There's a reason for that. I really like a lot of their mentalities and their overall design philosophy as far as, like, having the concept in 40k does still fit, in my opinion. I think you could argue whether or not you should include them, but in my opinion, they are definitely like an auto-include for me. So, The horrors, the brimstone, and the blue are definitely the small, whereas on the medium side you have pink and iridescent horrors, and then you have flamers and screamers. Then on the large side you have heralds of Tzeentch. Heralds are essentially kind of like pink horrors who have been elevated. You can also get exalted flamers, and technically exalted screamers would just be discs of Tzeentch, I suppose. So you could argue that is large as well. And then for the greater, we have the big chickens, aka the Changer of Ways. An important thing to note about all of Tzeentch's demons, and that applies to literally all of these, which is why I went over them very quickly, is they're not reliant on melee combat at all. They can perform melee combat. Many of them have knives. Obviously, a bunch of them have teeth. But really, only the Screamers are unable to use magic. Almost all of these units use warpfire. At the very least, they use warpfire, and the Flamers use tons of it. Of two particular flavors. Now, there are arguments over what the actual flavors do, but outside of the Heralds and the Changers of Ways that can use actual directed psychic magic, at the very least, all of the others can use warpfire. And we'll talk about warpfire at the very end. How do you summon and sustain these demons? Sacrifice, yes. Generally, it's a lot of sacrifice. I think it's pretty easy to get Tzeentchian demons into real space because of their relative size, lack of war gear, and their reliance on psychic powers. But it still does require human sacrifice, generally. Then, accomplishment of a goal and psychic powers. Achievement often attracts, especially the more intelligent of Tzeentchian demons. Why? They feed, or rather their god feeds, directly off of that success. If it's progress made in Tzeentch's name, it acts like a luring beacon to his demons, because every success is basically working towards the greater plan. And so they see that as like, an opportunity to insert myself into the narrative, and then to be recognized by Tzeentch himself. So they very much are going to be attracted by that, and then of course the secondary thing is, they are psychic creatures, they prefer psychic powers, they would like it if you were a psyker, which is again why a lot of Tzeentchian demagogues go out of their way to become a psyker through artificial means, or are psykers gifted by Tzeentch, or, just happen to be psykers to begin with. Now again, I talk about making psykers a lot. It can happen, it's a little bit more difficult. The idea is essentially you're awakening psychic powers in someone, since all souls technically have the ability, as in the power of belief. There are ways to do it artificially. There are also ways to do it traditionally. The most fail-safe way, aka the one that's technically the easiest, is to literally shove a demon inside of somebody and then have it use its powers through the human body. Essentially just make a possessed out of them. That's not really perfect. You're not making a psyker, you're just making a spellcaster of some sort. But yeah, psychic power is preferable for summoning the demons. What are they best for? Well, medium speed, maximum firepower. That's always the mentality of Tzeentch. He's not particularly fast, definitely not as fast as Slaanesh, and arguably not as fast as Khorne, his teleporting demons, and also his big war chariots and things like that, the machine type creatures. But definitely Screamers are pretty fast. Horrors can be fast when they want to be, but they're still kind of moving at the speed of foot. And Heralds on discs are floating more than they are like helicopter moving, so you could argue if they're fast or not, but at least most of the horrors are still moving at foot pace. So I put them at medium speed, but also maximum firepower. They all have access to warpfire. They all have access to magical powers. They're all going to rely on killing things at range, essentially. So they're never really gonna play fair. That was never in the cards. That's not the point. They're not engaging you in a straight up fight. They're going to bombard you with acid and flames from a long distance away and then call down lightning on your ass. It is not a fair fight. It was never supposed to be. These demons are not made for a fair fight. That's literally the whole point. The Flamer's not made for anything but burning you alive. The Horrors are not made for anything but burning you alive. The Screamers are cute, and they are made for something other than burning you alive, which is why nobody likes them. I'm kidding. I like Screamers arguably more than most of these folks, because they're very, very cute, in my opinion. But yeah, the idea is they're never going to want to have a long contact with the enemy. All of their strategy is based around minimizing contact. You come into contact with an enemy unit, you blast it with enough warp fire to basically create a miniature sun, and then you move on. If it survives the miniature sun, time to back up and reconsider, because whatever that is quite dangerous, and we should probably call in some bigger guns. Or let somebody else try it, like a herald who might have more complicated spells, or a changer of ways if we have access to that. So Tzeentch's demons, it's not cowardice, and it's not weakness either. You know, getting overwhelmed by a bunch of horrors is still terrifying. They have mouths and they have knives and daggers, not to mention getting impaled by screamers isn't fun, but still, if it comes down to a pure melee fight, they're at the disadvantage. So they definitely want to use those psychic powers to their best advantage. How do they affect demon engines items? Well, in my opinion, Tzeentch increases the power cost of demon engines, as in how long they can sustain themselves. He makes their power cost enormous, and he decreases the amount of time that they can stay on the field and stay powered. This is a major trade-off, but it comes with one of the biggest advantages of any demon engines. They may not last a long time, they may not last forever unless they're very well made, but they have far more active warp effects and far more various spells that they can be cast upon them. You know, a Mauler Fiend that has a normal demon in it, or a demon that isn't dedicated in it, I mean, it might breathe fire, it might have the ability to spray flames from its nostrils. A Mauler Fiend that has a dedication to Tzeentch is literally going to be white hot and spraying flames out of every orifice. It's going to be a burning sledgehammer wrecking ball of fire, constantly melting itself and ramming itself into targets, squishing flat like a Hesh round, and then spraying red hot warp fire into a tank. It's going to be way more dangerous and deadly, but you know what they say, the candle that burns twice as bright lasts half as long. So they're going to burn out of their energy much more quickly, all things equal. Finally, you have the glory of Tzeentchian fire. Tzeentchian fire, the power of warp fire that is available to Tzeentch, is insane. It is really incredible what warp fire can do. Most flame weapons are shit at armor penetration. That is the big thing, in my opinion, that holds back a lot of different units. They can't penetrate armor with fire. This is not a problem for Tzeentch, because Tzeentch's units are all using warp fire. Warp fire is more accurately described as plasma than it is as fire. It is heavily armor penetrating, and it will seep through metal because of its sheer heat. They're basically hitting you with the equivalent of like a sunburst if you have a whole unit of like pink horrors throwing fire at you. Warp fire is terrifying. It can be retrofitted into a lot of different kind of containers, including flamers. You can have flamers that shoot warp fire. Now, it's not necessarily all the same exact thing. You know, there's blue warp fire, there's pink warp fire, there's red warp fire. The whole thing about warp fire is just that it burns through material that fire technically shouldn't be able to. So warp fire has the advantage of all of the advantages of a flame weapon, as in it can't really miss, it can stick to stuff, it falls all around, it sprays in a huge arc, and none of the downsides of not being able to penetrate armor. It is one of the most massive upsides of Tzeentch that he has access to this basically catch-all, remove-everything weapon. The only things that it doesn't really work against is things that are relatively, if not extremely, resistant to psychic powers. Now again, most of the spells that his demons are slinging are a little bit more complicated to try and block and dispel than actual psychic powers, but it can be done, and it can be protected against with psychic powers. Now, do you really want to get into a psychic battle with a Lord of Change or even a Herald of Tzeentch? Probably not, unless you're a very confident psyker. But generally, it is possible, especially with the horrors. I would often imagine that psykers could easily block a good portion of the firepower from horrors if they were just throwing their standard fire. So, I know that was a quick one. and I kind of intended it to be. Tzeentch has a lot of stuff to him, but it's not really in his real Space Forces. It's more in Tzeentch himself. Credit naturally goes to GW, Jacob Bielski, Scott Purdy, Yang Zhe, Manuel Antonio, Jan Vereskov, Konstantin Void, Ilacha, Eduard Bocard, Dopolov, Kantin, Mike Ferrancha, Connolly Phi 98, Johan Greiner, ALKR, and Thomas Elliott. Now, I have gotten 2 videos out in a relatively short period of time. I know it took me a couple of days. There is more stuff coming, but I'd also like to float the idea that we have the 1-year anniversary of the channel coming up remarkably quickly. I know I have a lot of stuff to do. I know I'm working my way down the list very slowly. Do not worry, there will be another video coming out soon related to Darktide. We'll be going through the units for Darktide and discussing some of the lores and some of the theories that I have about them. But in general, I would really love opinions on what we should do for our anniversary as a channel. I put up my first video on the lasgun almost a year ago, and I'm getting up on that first time now, and now we're at 600 plus subscribers, and you guys have all been a great community, and I really would like to know if we'd like to do something like an all-day stream or something of that nature where I can put aside some time for you guys and do some community stuff. I might also think about doing another community drive, like we did last time, a homebrew drive. I think I would need a little bit of lead time for that, so I'd love to hear people's opinions. So should we do a homebrew drive? Should we not do a homebrew drive? What is the thought there? Either way, I much appreciated. I hope that you all enjoyed, and I wish you all a lovely good night.